We had a discussion about it. He knows that it's there. I said, can we do both? And he said, no, we're gonna do one at a time.
Yeah, not both units, but both.
No,
Yeah, I think we can do the same amount as we did.
The other one's not
Yeah.
scheduled yet, is it?
What?
Okay, so
Yeah.
we're on the same page.
Yeah, I can find that.
And I think we're gonna have an internal meeting on the subcommittee.
Chief,
Yeah,
he's
it's
coming,
okay.
he's just gonna be a little bit late.
Okay, that's fine.
I think.
Nice with this here? Just adds a better
Yeah,
order.
yeah.
It's not gonna do anything.
It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 12 to be, we can notify it. Is that just audio?
Has a room. It's pretty cool. It's like a 300-foot range.
Same difference.
It comes with a little case and it charges
Yes.
itself. 2 of them.
Holy moly, what's that called?
$100. There's like different ones, but this.
Does that go with any camera?
There's one for iOS and there's one for Android.
Yeah.
So it's just plug and play.
That's freaking very cool. I'm gonna take a picture of that.
Love it.
Folks, it's 11, but we're gonna wait a couple minutes to establish a quorum here, so.
This way is last one, the very first. You get it.
Drew, who's on the committee?
On this committee,
The subcommittee, yeah.
it's myself, it's Nate, it is Kate Libman, and Counselor Kretovic. And you, that's right.
And who?
And Counselor Sexton. Oh, so we have a quorum then, right now.
Yeah,
You're
no,
fine,
right?
right?
Yep.
There's the mayor. Mayor? Hi.
We're in here.
Is this social districts?
It is.
It is indeed.
Oh, God.
Come on in.
Is that where you're supposed to be?
Yeah,
Are you looking for the right cups?
that's where I think I'm supposed to be.
Mine's unlabeled.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Does not have the proper wording on it though, chief, so.
I like
Could
your
be a
spring.
problem.
I'll drink it quick.
shirt. Love it.
I think a real man wears quorum.
I
Right for you.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disrupt the meeting.
We haven't started yet,
Oh, good, okay.
but we do have a quorum, so we can.
Okay.
It's just a public meeting, so the audio is there, just so you don't get.
Thank you. So I'd like to call to order a meeting, a public meeting of the Subcommittee of the Public Safety Advisory Board on Social Districts. I'd like everyone in the room to identify themselves, please. We'll start with Counselor Sexton and then we'll go clockwise.
Okay, Amanda Grady Sexton, the at-large counselor and chair of the Public Safety Advisory Board.
Sergeant Dan White, the Community Service Division, Sergeant here at the Police Department.
John Chisholm, City of Concord Fire Chief and Emergency Management Service Coordinator.
Stacy Brown?
Catherine McLaughlin, Concord.
Jason Gerhardt.
Byron Champlin, Mayor, City of Concord.
Travis Craig, Treasurer in Town Concord.
Barrett Brown, Events Marketing Manager in Concord.
Jessica Martin, Executive Director at Intel Concord.
John Conforti, City Solicitor.
H. Grace, public member.
So before we get started, may we have a motion to approve the minutes of the previous subcommittee meeting?
So
Is there any debate on that issue? Second?
I wasn't there.
Okay. So are we allowed to approve them if one of the voting members was not there?
The voting member should abstain from that, and if you don't have a quorum on that issue, you can just table it to the next time that you have a quorum.
Okay, then we will table it until next time. Next time may actually be a little bit later in this very meeting, so we may bring that up again later on. So the purpose of this meeting is to establish the legal framework by which the city can pass an ordinance, or debate an ordinance rather, on the establishment of social districts in the city of Concord in accordance with the recent law that was passed at the state level. There is some precedent on this issue. Laconia has done it. We are looking at the best way and the safest way to implement it ourselves. And at the previous subcommittee meeting, it was apparent that we probably needed a little bit more legal framework to make sure that we were making a recommendation one way or another that was going to be in accordance with the law. And therefore give the full city council, full public safety board, and then the city council something that was resilient to legal scrutiny. So with that, I would like to turn the floor to City Solicitor Conforti to give a brief overview of the the situation, the world we're living in.
Sure, and I have some draft language to pass out, so I'm gonna pass that out to members of the committee. This is a draft, but I'm happy to share with members who are here, members of the public who are here. I'm not sure if I have, you can share that from there. Okay, I'll have a few for the other members who are coming later. So thank you for inviting me to this. As you know, the legislature passed the social district statute or series of statutes allowing municipalities to operate social districts last year pending a local opt-in option. And so we met with City Council last summer to decide whether to put this on the ballot, and City Council did in fact put it on the ballot and it was approved. So the first stage on social districts from a legal perspective is getting the municipal opt-in. We are past that hurdle. So the next question is on how do you actually implement this? And Drew, as you mentioned, the first city to actually do that and go through the implementation process was Laconia. They just did it. It's a few weeks old. I think it went live this weekend. I haven't heard any stories one way or the other of how it went or not, but they are a little bit ahead of us, and they serve as a good example. The other thing that I will just say is part of the legal framework that we were anticipating when the statute passed was administrative rulemaking from the Liquor Commission. That has not happened yet. It's not necessary, and my understanding is they are doing it, but it's on a slower timeline. But we had anticipated getting a little more meat on the bones of the statute from the commission itself, and they have not done that. So from a legal standpoint, there is not a lot for us to do. The statutes themselves define what can and can't be done within a social district. And without going chapter and verse through the statute, essentially the city council, in our instance, would need to establish the district, establish the boundaries, and create a management and maintenance plan. So that would indicate how are we going to manage this? How long is this going to be in effect? Is it going to be temporary? Is it going to be permanent? We have to set the boundaries. We have to announce the boundaries on a website. We have to also provide that to the Liquor Commission. We also need to make sure that we're meeting all the requirements in the statute in terms of clearly defining signage of where the district is set up, providing identifying who the people are, the participants are, because they need to be liquor licensees within that district, and ensuring that, how are we going to ensure that those licensees are meeting their obligations under the statute, because the city has obligations on setting this up, and then the operation still falls to the licensees to make sure they're using the proper receptacles, they are serving in the right manner, all of those types of things. So the next step for the city would be to actually step forward and establish a district. And the question is, how would you do that? Our feeling on it, having looked at this and looking at Laconia's example, is that there should be an enabling ordinance stating that how the city council would go about, one, establishing the district, and two, approving the maintenance and management plans. So that is not strictly necessary under the statute as written. However, we believe it's necessary, one, it's I think best practice. Two, we do have an ordinance on the books right now that says you can't be publicly walking around with liquor, and so we would need to carve out an exception to that general ordinance to create the social district and allow for liquor to be transported and consumed within those areas. So what I've put before you today as a draft is a very, very basic, and I don't think that we need to be any more fancy than this, what we have forward, which is to say, carve out the exception to the general prohibition on public drinking to create an exception for social districts. There's currently an exception already in place, as you can see from the strikeout, for commercial uses. So that is what's used when we have a patio or something that goes out into public spaces that is licensed by the city. That exception applies. This would be to expand that exception for social districts as defined under the statute. It also creates the process by which City Council would create a district, which is after a duly noticed public hearing, and to approve at that same public hearing where they establish a district, they should approve a management and maintenance plan. Those are, I think, are the foundations of what needs to be in the ordinance. One is carving out the exception. Two is authorizing City Council to take that action. And I think with regard to establishing it with a public hearing. There are the other items in here are what I would say are best practices, not necessarily required by statute, and therefore we can have a discussion on what builds on top of that foundation is necessary. So the other elements here in this ordinance would be creating a process to amend a maintenance and management plan after the fact. If we find out that, in fact, we need more signage in X location or Y location, or we need to make some minor adjustments to this, do we have to go through the full public hearing process again, which would be obviously a 2-month process to notice it and then have the hearing and then take the action. So allowing some wiggle room to not change the social district itself or change the maintenance and management plan of the social district without further public hearing. We've put that in. It is not necessary if it is something that makes this group uncomfortable, or obviously ultimately the council uncomfortable. That's not a legal necessity. It's something that we're recommending. And then with regard to paragraph 3 under the proposed ordinance, one thing that we had discussed is setting up a process before it gets to City Council in order to flesh out what is actually being asked, how we would establish the maintenance and management plan, and more particularly, how are we going to get input from all the individuals who are represented in this room of public safety concerns to make sure that there is a review process. So without going into the point by point of how that's going to be built, what we did in this enabling statute or ordinance is to basically say, we're going to create, before we do anything, we're going to create an application process and a review and enforcement process that would run through code enforcement. That seems like the logical place for it to sit. But my recommendation and next step for this in building it out would be that process itself and the application and review process would involve police, fire, probably public highways, public works as well, to make general services. Sorry, I'm using my state brain again. General services as well, to make sure that everyone is on the same page, everyone has input into potential pitfalls, and that when it comes up, the application comes up to City Council to say this, it's had a full vetting and recommendation with a report to council that looks at this from every aspect. So again, strictly not legally necessary, but I think advisable in order to make this process work on a going forward basis. So in summary, 1 and most of 2, I think are absolutely necessary if you want to move forward. The second half of 2 in terms of amendments, and 3 are recommendations, not necessary, but for your discussion for putting, I think, meat on the bones to move this forward and make a process that's actually going to be workable, both for applicants who might wanna establish a social district and internally between departments to be able to look at it and come up with a coherent recommendation to council. So I've talked a lot, I'll stop talking and I can take questions from you guys at this point.
So I'm gonna ask a question, then we'll open it up to anyone on the subcommittee, and then we'll open it up also to anyone in the room. My question is that what we're looking at right here, and if anybody does not have this in front of them and would like it, I just ask that you provide it to them. I can share mine as well, but I wanna make sure anybody who would like to see it has the opportunity to see it.
Absolutely.
What we're looking at here is the legal framework by which the city council can ultimately make a determination on if, when, and how they allow social districts in the city of Concord. Those social districts could fall into one of at least two categories. They could be the event-based category, like market days,
Yes.
which is a one-off. They could be on a perpetual basis, right? Or if the city council wanted to say, every Saturday in the summer, we're gonna allow the Eagle Square or whatever to be a social district between noon and 5 p.m., right? Both of those scenarios would be empowered by this underlying ordinance, is that correct?
That is correct. The statute itself doesn't differentiate between one-time social districts and perpetual or intermittent social districts. It just says that you need to establish social districts, and within the management and maintenance plan, you would establish when those districts would be live and when they wouldn't. And there is discretion for the city council to make that determination of, we want this to be a one-time, one day, one event, or we want it to be, as you said, every Friday for the summer, or we want it every Saturday in this area. That is ultimately, that would all fall under one framework for legal authorization. It doesn't need to be sliced up.
Or ultimately, city council could elect to deny.
Correct.
Correct, because the enabling statute at the state level and the referendum passed at the city level just allow us to empower the city council to make the ultimate decision. Is that a fair representation?
That is absolutely a fair representation.
Okay, because speaking only for myself, but I think a lot of people probably agree with me, you know, in our form of government, we elect people and we empower them to make decisions on things, and I think that works pretty well. We have several of them in the room, another one may be joining us later. So the role of a subcommittee is literally, how do we guide the legal conversation to empower them to actually have the debate? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And what this does is, it just basically lays the pipes for how does this get through a process, right? Creating a process to walk through. And it leaves discretion to city council for the ultimate decision of whether they want to approve it or not. And all of those gradations in between we're gonna do this on a one-time basis, or we're going to set up a permanent district. All of this is doing is creating a framework that allows city council to make that decision. And ultimately also, that paragraph 3 is giving staff the ability to give input on that as part of that process.
Okay. And following the application, or submittal of an application to the city, there's a public meeting, is that correct? Where the general public can come and voice concerns, offer input, things like that. Is that a step before, or is that public meeting the same meeting as when the city council actually debates and votes?
So that would be as written right now, there would be a public hearing on the action. So that the council would have to hold a hearing, take in any input before they would vote on the matter.
Okay.
So that is different than, say, an informational meeting that they would take on before something was placed on the agenda. This is written right now. The process would be, an application would come in, it would be reviewed under the application process, which is yet to be filled out. It would then be referred to city council. City council will put it on the agenda and schedule a public hearing. Then the public would have an opportunity to come in and give their input on their concerns or their support and everything in between. That would be done the same action as the item would be before the same day, same the same meeting that the action will be before the council for approval or.
Okay. Does anyone on the subcommittee have any questions for Solicitor Concord? Yes, sir.
Why did you decide to recommend a public hearing? And kind of as a follow-on to that, what are the, when you say properly noticed, is that just straight right-to-know requirements, or what other special requirements under city ordinance?
There are requirements for notice on action in terms of timelines, and so we want to make sure that we're abiding by all the other public notices that we give for public hearing.
So what are those?
Off the top of my head, I can tell you that there's a lesser amount of time than we normally do. What we normally do for process is that the month before a public hearing, we notice that a public hearing will take place. We put it on the agenda for the city council on that month, and I noted as a item tabled for a public hearing, so the public has a full month notice beforehand. The actual notice requirements are actually tighter than that, so if you needed to do for a emergency or some other type of expedited hearing, we could do a lesser notice. But that is how we typically do it for our public hearings. So a public hearing is not strictly necessary under the law. However, I will say that when we went through the process to approve the item for the ballot, there was an identification that it would be important for the public to have a voice on this when districts are established on a going forward basis. And there was a very clear delineation of the fact that the decision on the public option to put it on the ballot was merely a decision to give the option for city council to take that action in the future. And certainly at that point, and council can correct me if my memory of that is not accurate, but certainly got the sense from council that they felt that it would be important to get public input before any establishment would be done.
So I have a couple of follow-up questions. So in our March meeting, as reflected in the minutes that we already approved of the larger committee, we discussed, having a trial for a temporary social district. We specifically discussed the in-town Market Days project. Obviously, we heard at our last larger meeting that was what we had approved this subcommittee was somehow legally insufficient. Could you explain how it was legally insufficient?
I have not seen what was approved.
So you didn't review those?
I did not review those meeting minutes.
You didn't review that motion?
I did not. So what I was advised was that you were having a subcommittee meeting on this, and you wanted to look at enabling ordinance on a going forward basis, and we talked about what is the best process for that going forward. So I have not seen what was put forward from the PSCB before. If I was supposed to review that, I apologize. It's not something that I had a chance to look at before today.
And my last question here is, at the PSAB, both, in January when we first discussed this, in March, in our last subcommittee, which we don't yet have approved minutes at, we discussed at length, basically not only what Chair Beamer said, that there might be differences between temporary and permanent social districts, but also kind of that there would be different considerations for each, different public safety considerations for each of those kind of events and individual events as well. One of the things that I'm curious about is, obviously with Public Safety Board, we're supposed to have input on things of public safety nature. It seems to me that the way this is drafted, we don't have any input over anymore. It's just city council, do your thing, staff, do your thing. Why are we even seeing this?
So that section 3 is a preliminary bare bones for review based on what I understood the procedure going forward would be. Certainly, if you wanted to either in the ordinance itself or as part of the code administration review, have a rule for PSAB, that is certainly your prerogative to do so. This is ultimately supposed to be a platform for discussion to then talk about what else might be necessary. And as I said, with regard to the legal framework that's necessary under the statute, 1 and 2 are what you have to have. What you decided to take away after 1 and 2 or add after 1 or 2 is up to the subcommittee, PSAB generally, and obviously ultimately council.
And just to clarify something you said earlier in your presentation, none of this that's in front of us is legally necessary under the statute, correct?
The 1 and 2 would be legally necessary under the statute. So we need, right now, it is illegal to carry an alcoholic beverage in a public area. Unless it's within, so you have to get an exception for that. So that is legally necessary. You have to create a process for city council to effectuate their statutory authority to create the social district and approve the maintenance and management plan. So that is absolutely necessary. Everything beyond that is really a policy decision for, again, this group, PSAB generally, and then ultimately the council. All right, other questions?
So my understanding here, and just for clarity, if I'm mistaken, please somebody on the committee, subcommittee, feel free to chime in, is the purpose of this meeting right here is that we're either going to pass or not pass a motion to accept a recommended ordinance. This is going to go up to the full public safety board, and then they are going to do the same, do similar, with more substantive debate. At the public safety board, the full board will be the venue for more debate on other things we think we should recommend to city council, okay? And then ultimately, the recommendation of the public safety board, which is again, only a recommendation, will be taken into consideration or not by the full city council when they ultimately debate how to implement or not implement social districts in the city.
That is my understanding, that this is an initial recommendation. Again, that this subcommittee wanted to know legally, how do we do this? What is the structure that we have to do this? And that this will be a recommendation that can go up to PSAB and then obviously also up to city council. And at any point, that we can have debate and amendments on those issues. And as I said, in order to set up your discussion, what I wanted to advise you of is, these are the must-haves. All the things on top of that are really policy decisions that the people in this room and then ultimately going up through the process have, an ability to tweak, add, subtract, whatever they want to do. Legally, what we need is, again, create the exception, create the enabling ordinance. Other than that, there's a lot of possibilities for you to add extra process in. So that's something that, again, you may want to debate today, or you may want to take up with the larger group after this recommendation.
Yeah, in order to have the debate, we need to set up the legal framework under which the debate may exist. So that's this meeting. The penultimate debate will be the public safety board, right? The ultimate debate and ultimate decision will be the full city council. Good. Councilor Grady Sexton.
Thank you. Attorney Conforti, we had in the full public safety advisory board, there were some members that had some larger concerns around safety and discussed the possibility of having a sunset provision in the enabling ordinance. Do you have any general thoughts about the necessity or what that might look like?
So I think because I understand the concern with having that, and especially with anything new, having a sunsetting component in there can be a comfort. I personally don't see where this particular process needs a sunsetting provision, because each district then itself needs to be approved with detail by the city council. And so they have it within their control to essentially sunset each district on their own, right? By creating it as a one-time district and then forcing someone to come back. So because unlike a lot of other enabling statutes where we're going to put something on the rails and then let it go, this is something that can be actively managed by city council through the ways that they approve it. So they can essentially, again, sunset those, each district as they wish, or put restrictions, time restrictions on them as they wish. So I don't see that as being necessary into the ordinance, whereas you can, that is something that the tool is still there for city council to use on a case-by-case basis, rather than having to go into the ordinance and continuously change it. Hey, we want to sunset it, now we want to kick it out another 3 years. You can really do that work within your authority to approve social districts and the maintenance and management plans.
Could I have a quick follow-up?
Yep.
And this would is this already more restrictive than Laconia, because Laconia established just one permanent district?
They did, yes. It's a what I would refer to as an intermittent district, but it is indefinite. There is no time limit on that. So this again is just the framework to approve the district itself. There hasn't been an application. There isn't an application process yet. But right now, this does not create anything permanent other than a process for consideration.
Quick follow-up. So if the Public Safety Advisory Board wanted to be even more restrictive, we could limit the ordinance to say that we were only going to consider in the permitting process temporary districts versus a permanent long-term district.
You could do that if you so wish. You can limit the types of districts that you are willing to consider, or you can do that work when the districts come to you. It's really, again,
Through like a on the application would be like, are you looking for a permanent or a?
correct, yes. So you can do that work. Essentially, council retains control over the districts at any time before they establish them and approve them of what they want and what they, in terms of boundaries, in terms of timing, all of those types of things. There is a great amount of discretion in the statute given to council in terms of what they are willing to approve.
So I'll go to you, and first I'm going to ask him one clarifying question. When you said Laconia is intermittent but perpetual, what I took that to mean was it has clearly defined days and hours.
Correct.
Okay, but there is no sunset. It is not sunset on December 31st, 2026.
Correct.
It just keeps going until the city council finds a reason to not keep it going.
That is correct.
Okay.
So it is not a permanent district in that you can't go on Tuesday at 8 a.m. and have a beer in the district. But it is set up, I think, for weekends only for specific time periods, but there is no expiration on that authority to have the districts. And subject to those time.
Follow-up question, if the city council did determine to put a sunset provision on it where they said this will go through calendar year 2026, okay? They still retain the authority to come back between now and then and say, nope, we're pulling the plug.
They would.
Is that correct?
They would.
Okay, so it's not, if the city council was to commit to a sunset provision, then that's just when it will expire if no action has been taken. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, city council retains the right to take action
Absolutely.
if it hasn't been going well or for any other reason.
Absolutely.
Okay. Councilor Credit.
Thank you. Couple of other thoughts on that. In our subcommittee, one of the things that was very important to us was the ability for the police chief or the fire chief to end the district at any time. And the language that we were talking about was the city manager or his designee can close the district at any time. So that if there was an incident, we'll just say a fight breaks out and the police chief says, that's it, close the district. does that need to be language included in here in the ordinance?
I don't think it needs to be in the ordinance, and I think that one of the reasons that we had suggested paragraph 3 in the ordinance is to provide some of those detailed things, like oversight from fire, police, others, that this approval would be subject to ultimately the enforcement policy of, again, we've put this under code, but it could be under the city manager's policy. Again, that policy would have to be approved by the city council. But something along those lines of, these are the instances where we're just shutting it down immediately. You can make the approval subject to those policies and provisions, and then that gives you more authority to be able to go in and sort of change the policies and provisions as tweaks need to be made, as opposed to putting it in the ordinance. You certainly can put it in the ordinance, it just gives you, there's more process to then change it at that point in time. So what we are suggesting with regard to this, and again, it is a suggestion, is you have a very light touch with regard to enabling you to do this, setting up a process, and having a policy attached to that application process for how these are going to be enforced. And then again, that policy is still in the hands of city council up to their approval. And then you can adjust policy as you like without having to dig into the ordinance and making constant changes to the ordinance.
I have one more thought. One of the other things we talked about in this application process, that it would go through code so that they could review everything, but that it would come up to the public safety board so that we could get the input of the fire department and the police department. And for me, I think that that's very important, that in this process, when there's an application, it goes to the public safety board. This is not uncommon, that we have other things that go through applications, that go through code enforcement, that go to committees of the city for their vetting before they go up to city council or whatever it is for approval. So from my perspective, I think that it's important for us to maintain that to the benefit of our police department and our fire department. The other question I have is in regards to insuranceability, or insuranceability, such a word, general liability insurance. Typically when we have an event, in town Concord, I'm gonna use as the example for market days, every single vendor has to submit a general liability insurance waiver for the city of Concord, 3 million, 1 million, 3 million, I think is what the limits are, the minimums are. For this social district, do we also want to have general liability insurance holding the city of Concord harmless in the event that anything should happen inside the social district by those individuals that are selling or distributing alcohol?
Yes, we would probably want to, as part of that policy, make sure that their insurance is up to date, that we're named as additional insurance, and that we have an indemnity agreement, or a separate indemnity agreement with them, as we do with our licensees, for example, who use city parks for liquor. So using that as the template for what we would do with participants in a social district, I think it would make a lot of sense.
Thank you.
So I just want to make sure I correctly understand the summary of the 3 things in front of me. First point is a waiver of current city ordinance about walking around with open containers, whatever. The second one is we would be essentially asking the city council to approve its own authority to establish a social district after they have a public hearing, and then they can say that they can amend it without a public hearing if they need to change it later. And then third, to ask the city council to tell code administration that they have to establish a application process. Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct.
How is this not an enormous waste of our time? I mean, with all due respect, why am I looking at this? Why didn't the city council just act on this whenever this came up?
I'm not sure
And I'm
that's,
sorry,
I'm not sure that's a legal question for
It's not
my
a legal
decision, so
question. I just want to be clear with everyone in the room. I'm going to vote against this motion. I think this was something the city council should deal with. If the city council had questions about, should we have wristbands, what should we have on cups, those type of questions, that's something I think was appropriate for the subcommittee and our committee generally. what's in front of us is just city council saying we can do the thing that we're going to do.
Can I just,
That was a
I'm
rhetorical
gonna
question.
try, yeah, but I'm gonna try to twist this into an answer as to why it may be important. So as currently constituted, I completely understand your point. There's not a lot there for you to dig into, because what this is saying is giving a platform to push this forward without a lot of specifics in terms of this has to happen, how are you gonna do, how are you gonna do these bans, or how are you gonna do insurance, or when is the fire chief and police chief going to? Those are things that are important to you. What I would say is an important point for consideration for this group is this is the base, and do you feel it necessary at this base level where it is just a mechanism essentially for approval? Do you feel like it's necessary to add more in at the ordinance level, right? So the way we've set up this process is, this is an ordinance that's very basic that says, yes, you can carry alcohol around if it's a social district. Yes, city council can establish a social district, and after public hearing, and the details are left to the process to determine that. But whether you want something more in there in the ordinance right away is a question for you and ultimately PSAB. Yeah, it's a policy question.
Well, that goes back to one of the questions I asked you initially, which is one of the things that this subcommittee considered its last round. And again, I know we haven't approved the subcommittee minutes, but I do believe that they're accurate, and that's why I would make the motion to approve them. In Town presented us with a plan. We said, hey, looking at the statute, there are a couple of things that we have considered as a larger committee. I believe Councilor Foote made a motion that said he wants an after-action report. We agreed to that as a larger committee. That motion is pending. When we came to the subcommittee, that was specifically discussed. We said, hey, we want a demo. Even as early as January, we discussed using market days as the demo. And then market days came forward. They had a district boundaries, they had a map, they had an enforcement, they had a thing about approved containers, they're plastic, with the picture and all that stuff that liquor enforcement enforces, signage and management plan. Again, the motion that we approved the last subcommittee was, yes, that's fine. And then we had a second motion that we also approved that said we were asking the city council to send the map and all the necessary things to Liquor Commission, because we wanted a demo, because we figured if anything went wrong, we could come back, fix that, and say this is a permanent thing, knowing that the entity in the city that does big events that shut down Main Street is in Town Concord. So what we have in front of us is totally meaningless to me in my role as I see it in this committee and subcommittee, because I'm here for the policy question. Whether or not the city council authorizes itself to do the thing it's already authorized to do because the voters voted on it is totally irrelevant. I'm not gonna support this because this is a complete waste of my time.
You don't need to be on the subcommittee if you don't want to be, Mr. Grace.
I mean, if
I
you
think
want to
that-
kick me off,
No, I don't want to
may do
kick
so,
you off, but what I do want to say is that Mr. Conforti was asked to come in and do some enabling, a draft of some enabling ordinance, and that's what he did here today, because it seems as if the statute requires that before moving forward. I know that there are some people who wanted to move forward very quickly without having that enabling ordinance, but that was not within our purview to do that. We need to have something in order to, A, suspend current ordinance that says that this is illegal, and B, to create it, right?
Well, if we were here to say what we've discussed at the larger committee and at the last subcommittee, which was we think there should be a difference between permanent social districts and temporary social districts. Here's some things we want, like wristbands, etc. Yeah, I would be supportive of that, but just asking the city council to do the thing they're already allowed to do, I'm not gonna support that. if you want to kick me off the subcommittee, feel free to do so, but I'm gonna continue to sit here until I'm not allowed to.
Go ahead.
If I might. Well, you would
Councilor
certainly
Craddock.
support moving this ahead to the city council so that we can get beyond this.
I don't think it's necessary for us to do so. So I'm not going to support that motion.
Can I ask a follow-up? I don't understand, you don't believe that this ordinance is necessary in order to create a social district?
I don't believe it's necessary for me to have input in my role, as I understand it, for this ordinance to pass and move forward. If we're talking policy questions, that makes sense, and I'm totally on board with that. But I'm not on board with saying to the city council, please allow yourself to vote to establish a social district after a public hearing. That seems to be outside the purview of what my role is on this board.
I'm sorry, I just don't follow.
No, Councilor Craddock.
Thank you. I think the role of anybody on any advisory board is that when any ordinance comes before the body, that we are not making authority for ourselves, but we are vetting it for the city council so that we can say, yeah, we think this is good. Now, whether we think it has any content or
But
not.
there's no policy in here, so what am I doing?
It is an ordinance before us that is being asked for us to basically make a decision if we think it should go out to the full public safety board, because we are just a subcommittee of them. And I would make that motion, that we at least send it to the full public safety board, whether there's policy in it or not, in order for us to pass an ordinance in the city council. If they're gonna want feedback from the committee that actually oversees this, and that happens to be the public safety board. So that'll be my motion. I don't know if I have a second.
May we take a brief respite here for a second?
Sure.
Okay, what I would like to do is I would like to, for my own memory's sake, entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the past subcommittee of the social district.
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The minutes from the previous subcommittee meeting are now approved. Back to this discussion.
I think we need a second first on my motion. And it's not.
Oh, okay.
Who's making the motion?
I guess, let's see, I can make a second for the purpose of discussion. That's fair. But I think that what we have before us is bare bones. But what I do think the role of the subcommittee and then the Public Safety Advisory Board is to determine if you want to make this more restrictive. And that's why we're here today, to determine whether or not we want to take this, and we can't take away from items 1 or 2, because that's what's creating our ability as a city to move forward on this, but we do, as a public safety board and as the subcommittee that's asked to get into the minutia of this, decide whether we want to have more protective measures put in place before this goes back to the Public Safety Advisory Board and then eventually to the council. So I seconded the motion because if we want to move this forward, but I think that it would be wise to see if there are any additional amendments that the subcommittee wants to look at to put any additional protective language in here to make this more restrictive, or if we think that there needs to be some additional safety provisions baked into this. Does that make sense, Mr. Grace?
I understand yes, I understand what you're saying. As written, this basically gives unfettered discretion to the city council in making the rules.
But it's up to us whether or not we want to change that. Mr. Conforti was asked to do something. I asked him directly to just provide us with some bare bones enabling language so that we could come back here and decide what we want this to look like. It doesn't need to look like this, but 1 and 2 needs to be there, but we can take out 3 and we can add a new 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 if we want it to look very different. So I do think that that is a very appropriate use of our time and your time as well.
I mean, I would just say, I totally agree with what I think was the general consensus of the committee before, which is that many of these things are going to be a case-by-case basis. We're talking about a permanent social district in Eagle Square, for example, versus Market Day's 2-day event. type thing. Those are different. I would expect different recommendations from the emergency departments based on that, but unless or until there's a motion for amendment that adds some policy in here that makes sense, I'm a no.
So my understanding here, and again, probably speaking only for myself, is that, the further down the layers you go from the city council, the more we are trying to manage a lot of the preliminary sausage making. Is that at the subcommittee level, we're trying to recommend a legal framework that enables both the Public Safety Board and the full city council to engage in a debate. Once we recommend the legal framework, then that empowers the Public Safety Board to have a more substantive policy debate about what we think should or should not be necessarily recommended to the city council. That's the policy argument I would make. The political argument I would make, and this is because we've elected people to represent us and we've empowered those people to make decisions. When they make decisions we don't like, there's an election, and the problem has a built-in mechanism to make change if we feel like they made the wrong decisions. The amount of time that we spend at the subcommittee level or at the full Public Safety Board level debating things like boundaries, debating things like what type of cups we're going to use or wristbands, things like that, it's all very valuable things to consider and very valuable policy recommendations, but we need to do so mindful of the fact that the full city council is going to re-debate all of those things again, as is their prerogative. So my mission or my view is that we are trying to shepherd the discussion through passage of things like ordinances, or not passage, of recommendations on things like ordinances. And I would like, if possible, to guide the discussion towards any amendments to this proposed ordinance that we think might be relevant at this time, that we would like to recommend to the full Public Safety Board. And I would also like to make sure anyone in the room who would like to ask a question, certainly of myself, but most specifically of Solicitor Conforti, has the opportunity to do so. Would anyone in this room like to ask a clarifying question? Would you please identify yourself?
Jessica Martin in Concord. Thank you for being here. So my question is around the public hearing piece of it, and I'm grateful that we got the opportunity to ask questions before they approved this, but can I see that real quick? Yeah. So it says a public hearing for every social district, and I know you said we needed 1 and 2, but that was above and beyond the statute, right? The public hearing piece.
The public hearing is not strictly called out in the statute. However, as I said, when the decision was made to place this on the ballot, there was what we heard from council was a desire to allow input for the public when the determination was made. So that's why it's written in that.
Okay, so, I just do events, so hear me out on this. So 60 days for a public hearing, but you have to notice for a public hearing, and then they can't vote, city council can't vote on it at that public hearing. It has to be an additional, so it's 90 days out from that?
No, the typical process is it gets noticed at the, so for example, if we're gonna put something forward that needs a public hearing, it would get noticed at the July meeting for a public hearing, at August city council meeting, at a public hearing, and then there's a public hearing action the same day. So this is really from the time of notice, it's a 30 days.
30 days, okay, that's helpful. 30 days for a public hearing, so I guess I'm very logistics, because that's why I do events, but, so you apply for, basically for an event, you'd have to apply for a liquor license, apply for an event license, apply for a social district license, probably all at the same time with a management plan to submit.
It would not necessarily be it would not be a license, so for example, but if there was an application process requesting that the city council establish the social district. Again, that hasn't been fleshed out at all.
That's more policy.
But exactly, that's more
Got it.
policy, and you know, to go to Mr. Perry's point, the question of the policy is not just what the policy is, but where the policy sits. Does the policy sit in the ordinance itself, or does the policy sit in a policy document that governs the application process and the enforcement process? So I don't mean to go down that road
Sure.
too far on that, but yes, that would be, if, again, 3 is not necessary, an application process is not necessary or called down by the statute. But if, as I understand it, the idea was to have participants for the social district, or in your case, maybe, you know, the sole participant in the social district, a participant in this process, the idea would be to apply so that they can set forth, this is what we think is a reasonable, what we're asking for, these are reasonable boundaries, these are reasonable maintenance management policies. But again, that is all up to, that is, all we're creating here is a vessel for that policy to be put into down.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. My comment on the public hearing is, well, I understand that, especially maybe for the first time. I find that there was a lot of value in the social district subcommittee meeting that we met, because we were with all of the people that are like our partners in the event. And so I think with the public hearing, you get, you know, a lot of people in the community providing their feedback, but they don't have as much knowledge about executing in the city, in like code and fire and all of that. So, you know, on the face of it, I think there would be more value in then bringing it to social district subcommittee or public safety subcommittee versus like a public hearing. But that's just my feedback.
Does anyone else in the room have questions for Attorney Conforti at this time? Or anyone else for that matter?
Can I ask a question?
Councilor Credit.
Following up on what Ms. Martin just said, Section 2, it could say that the city council votes to establish a social district and approve a management maintenance plan for the district in conforming with the requirements of blah, 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 blah. After a public, properly noticed public hearing, that could be after review of the Public Safety Board and then submitted under consent agenda to the City Council and not have to have a public hearing on it, of which any member of the City Council could then pull in order to have discussion. So we would no longer be tied to a 30-day public hearing notice. It could just be on consent agenda, assuming that the Public Safety Board did the review and submitted a report on a consent agenda for council consideration. Much like what we do for closing Auburn Street at Halloween, or for the Coffee and Cars event. It's a consent agenda item, but it was reviewed somewhere, so it could go through code enforcement to public safety and a consent agenda item after this ordinance is adopted. Is that correct?
Yes, that is permissible under the statute as written. The public notice is not. I apologize because I'm trying to roughly approximate 1 and 2 are necessary, and 3 is an addition. But that component of 2, which I think I did testify to earlier, is the public notice component is not strictly required under the statute. The reason why we put it in the recommendation is based on the discussions with council. But from a legal perspective, it is not a necessary element. So if this board, and obviously going up and further recommendations, decides that they would not like to have a public hearing associated with that, and to allow it to go through a consent agenda with whatever pre-process happens with regard to a review by the SAD or others, you can do that, absolutely.
So question for both of you in your relative areas of expertise, elected official, city solicitor. If we were to debate the merits of having or not having a public hearing on the issue, that would probably be an appropriate debate to have at the full Public Safety Board advisory meeting, discussing whether or not it should or should not happen. Is that both legally accurate and also fair, generally based on advisable?
If you want to answer first.
I can answer from the advisory board standpoint. I think what is important for you today is to look at this is a recommendation, and to say, before this goes forward, if you want to make adjustments or you want to see different options on that, that is something that our office can put together in anticipation of either a further meeting of this group, but more likely, because we want to move this forward, is moving into the further group, to the full group. So if what comes out of today is we're making a recommendation, yes, move this forward, but we would like to see, certain changes to the ordinance or certain other options to the ordinance for consideration, we can absolutely do that. Again, what I want you to walk away from today is, well, we do need an ordinance, we need to get that exception out. We do need a process for approval. And the rest of that is up to you in terms of how you would like to set that policy. And if you see this and say, we would like to see options of without a public hearing, or we would like to see options with a full vote of, we really would like you to identify who are the people who are going to be part of the process for the application and review of the application. If you want to put in, if you feel like you're in a position to say, we would like, wristbands and cups and all these things in the ordinance itself, and we'd like you to take a look at how that would go forward, we can certainly do that. So, and I don't think it's, I don't need to speak for you, but as an advisory committee, you're just making recommendations, and if a recommendation is, we recommend that you proceed forward with this legal process, but we'd like you to also consider alternatives or different language on X, Y, and Z, that's something that we can do.
So we could theoretically pass a motion to approve this as written, but in the motion, it would be indicated that we were going to actually pull out and debate the issue of the public meeting at the full Public Safety Board. And then my request to you would be to equip us with the options that we have, the menu, so to speak, of what are the choices that we have at our disposal, so we can sort of guide that conversation. And then the Public Safety Board can adopt and recommend an amended version that we send further up the chain.
I think that's absolutely accurate, that the recommendation from this group could be, we want to consider this, but we think these are areas that need further debate at the full, whether, question of, is a public hearing necessary or not, or is it advisable or not? Do we want to add more detail into do we want a application and review process, and if so, what does that look like? Is this enough, or do we want more information on that? Are there particular policy issues that we feel should be embedded in the ordinance itself and not left to policy or staff or review? Things like, do we want PSAB to be to review every application? Those are things, again, you can again, as an advisory committee, you have the bad news is you don't have any sort of, you're just making recommendations. The good news on that is I think you have that gives you more freedom to say, we're pushing this forward, but these are the things that we think that we should think about.
Councilor Burbank.
Ultimately, if we pass this, as you're saying, with we've debated two options, we're sending it up to the Public Safety Board. It's a report that is going to the Public Safety Board with this and the second option, removing the public hearing. When we get to that full board, what I think is important is that we're making things really difficult for people, and I don't want it to be difficult. I want the first or second time out, everything to come back to the Public Safety Board for review so that we can say, this was good, this was bad, let's change these policies. That's what good governance is that we start somewhere, but we review and we make adaptations afterwards. We don't seem to be even stepping out the gate yet. And what I'd like to do is at least get us out the gate with as little red tape as possible, knowing that the full Public Safety Board will be analyzing whatever it is that is first approved so that we can be better. And I think that is an expectation of the community.
Mr. Mayor, so could we just be very specific in terms of what we're asking, Mr. Conforti to come back with in terms of possible language to the full committee? The full committee will be meeting on June 18th, our regular meeting. And so I just would like to be able to give you some direction in terms of what we're looking for. What I'm hearing is that we're looking for a alternate that just removes the public hearing component altogether, and then one that gives the full Public Safety Advisory Board the authority to hold a public hearing or to review the maintenance plan and to bring it forward or to approve or deny a proposed maintenance plan. Is that correct? So 3 options, I guess?
I think that's, those are the ones that we had discussed. And so we can provide alternate language, we can provide different, mix and match language that the full board can take a look at and decide which direction they want to go in. So certainly, if that's the direction of this board, I'll be happy to, before June 18th, put together those options. And I could even more clearly delineate, and we could do this maybe by changing the paragraphs a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
These are the must-haves, and these are the things that are up to debate.
To just before your follow-up question, by approve or deny a maintenance plan, are you saying be granted the authority by proxy to veto a maintenance plan, or are you saying the authority to review and then make a recommendation to city council on the maintenance plan?
I have no opinion either way.
I would just say from a statutory standpoint, the authority to approve the maintenance plans is with the city council. I certainly understand the idea of having PSAB be giving feedback on that, but I think that would be probably within the statutory framework more of a recommendation than a review and recommendation.
Okay, Councilor Grady Sexton had a follow-up?
Yeah, it was just logistically, are you available to, at the time of our next Public Safety Advisory Board, to help?
June 18th at 3 p.m. in City Council chambers.
Perfect.
I am completely free.
Awesome.
Okay, Dana.
So Councilor Kretovic, follow-up or new question?
Yes, what I was gonna suggest is that whatever comes before the Public Safety Board in the second version of the ordinance that we have here, that they would have the authority to amend existing management maintenance plans without a public hearing, and it is a recommendation that goes up to council, so they retain that as well. But the Public Safety Board can also recommend denial of the application as our recommendation up to City Council on consent agenda. And then if somebody wanted to pull it in order to approve it, it would then be a discussion of the council. It's the time frame that I'm looking at, the amount of time that it takes to notice a public hearing, then have the public hearing, and then let whatever organization it is do their organizational part of the event is a barrier in and of itself. If it's on consent agenda, it's 30 days. Max, probably, because it's max.
Yeah.
Councilor Grady Sexton.
I think we just need to balance that with what is the public's right to be able to weigh in if they have concerns with a particular event, right? So I think that, I personally have, this is not either way for me, right? I'm not dying to have this happen, but I do think that we need to weigh whether or not we are making this an expeditious possible thing for events with ensuring that neighbors or people living downtown who may have noise concerns or have a particular issue with parking or whatever it may be have an opportunity at some point to weigh in. And so I think it's just, how do we do that?
May I ask a question about it? Mr.
Councilor Kretovic, yes.
To Councilor Grady Sexton's point, if there is something on consent agenda, a member of the council can pull it and hold it for a public hearing.
Absolutely.
Did you?
Sorry.
what I suggested was that if it was on consent agenda, anyone on the council can pull it and hold it for a public hearing.
Let me rephrase that. They could pull it for debate. That wouldn't necessarily schedule it for a public hearing, but during debate, if the mayor wanted to hear from the public, that's something I can do.
But the Public
That is
Safety
what I meant.
Advisory Board, I'm sorry, Mr. Weaver, could have a hearing.
Yes.
You could-
And that is one of the options that we'll have in front of us, right?
Correct.
I would certainly, and apologies for interrupting, I would certainly offer as an alternative or as a potential solution here, that the Public Safety Board be the sounding board for the actual hearing to take work off the plate of City Council and then compile not only minutes, obviously, perhaps even a transcript, but a summary, distill down a summary of public comments and make sure that everything that was said at that public hearing makes its way up to the decision makers. That's a part of the workload that I would be more than happy to take off of other groups that are more limited on time. So if that's an option, let the minutes reflect that discussing that option is something I'm supportive of. Because again, speaking only for myself and not all the members of the Public Safety Advisory Board, it seems to me that if we could hold a public hearing at the Public Safety Board level, that would make the process a lot cleaner and a lot more, I'm trying to think of the word, transparent, accessible to the public. So I don't, Councilor Kretovic.
I think it's all of the above. The chair is sitting right behind me, and she sets the agenda. So she can make it a public hearing on any item that is on our agenda, that there'll be a public hearing. It's the noticing of the neighbors that we would probably have to address in some fashion, because there's gonna be a public hearing on that. And even to that further point, any item that goes up to consent, whether it's from public safety or it's from traffic advisory, a counselor has a right to pull it from consent for this debate, and the council table can make a motion, hold it over for a public hearing, and then that would be the 30-day notice, and the public hearing would be the next month. It was kind of be like putting it on suspense. Do I have this right, Your Honor?
More or less.
More or less. Perfect. But there is always a process to include the public further if we needed it. But at your point, and Councilor Grady Sexton, when she creates the agenda, she can say, and this will be up for public hearing.
My concern is, and this is, the mission or the objective of mine, not necessarily the process, is to make sure that whatever the public input process is, that it is very clearly articulated, and that anyone who wants to engage in the public input process has every tool available to them to do so. So it is less the venue, and it is more the spirit and the motivation of making sure that the public, particularly neighbors, right, have the opportunity to voice any concerns they have. Because I believe it's their right to do so.
It's support and concern.
Support or opposition, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So if we have any more questions,
I have a
Councilor
motion.
Kretovic.
No?
I don't. Okay, I'm gonna defer to a member of City Council here for some procedural advice. Councilor Kretovic did make a motion earlier. What action are we to take at this point in time on her motion?
We take a vote.
Okay, and could you please just repeat the motion?
I think that we were recommending, I might make an amendment to it. We were recommending that this ordinance be sent forward to the Public Safety Board for their review, and then further to City Council. And the amended of the motion is that Mr. Conforti will also give us another version of this that removes the public hearing portion in front of City Council, and it allows review of the Public Safety Board for submitting to the City Council under consent.
Okay. Do I have a second on that motion?
My second is seconding.
I'm sorry, on the amendment.
My second is seconding.
Your second is seconded.
Yes.
So to be clear, excellent point. Are we making a motion on the amendment?
First, the amendment is taken up first.
Okay, so we are now taking up the amendment. Okay.
Correct.
And we had a second on the motion for the amendment.
That is correct.
Okay.
You wanna speak?
I feel so.
Nothing to say,
I
okay.
will vote for the amendment. I will not vote for the underlying, the amended motion.
Okay. I'm a yay. Okay, so we have three,
I'm a yes.
yes. So was that 3 to abstain or was that unanimous?
I'm voting for the amendment.
For the amendment, okay.
I'm voting against the amended.
I don't think we have to take up.
No, the
Understood.
amendment passed, so now the larger, do you wanna?
For the singular, that it goes to public hearing now? Okay, I'm a no.
Do we do another motion or are we just going into a vote?
So right now, before us, what we have is a proposal that says that we are passing this along to the Public Safety Advisory Board in addition to some drafted language that Attorney Conforti will have for additional options for their review. So now the motion, I believe, would be to move that forward.
Got
Move the
So the first one was just to accept that there is an amendment. The second one here is the actual amendment that we're voting on.
Okay. So do we have a motion for that?
Yes, that's the motion on the table.
It's already on the table.
Is to send 2 options up to the Public Safety Board for review.
Okay.
So all of you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Nay.
Okay. The ayes have it. 3 to 1. Is there any other action that needs to be taken for this subcommittee at this point in time? And does anyone have any, to be fair, anyone have any questions that they want to get in before we adjourn?
I just have one item for the meeting minutes. I want to make sure that the recommendation that comes from our board is that whatever it is that ultimately gets passed by the city council, that in the first few social districts, there is a review process.
Okay.
And I don't think that that needs to be in the ordinance. I think it needs to be understood that until such time that we decide we don't need to do review, that we should have a review at the onset.
I have a clarification, because I know at the PSAP, Councilor Footer made that motion, we voted on it, it was approved. Are we gonna need to make another motion in following up?
No, I don't think it's a motion. I think it's a clarifying to the report that we discussed that. We are aware of that amendment that it passed and that we still agree with that, despite what the language is in the ordinances here, that the review process holds.
Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion, meeting adjourned.